What does a woman do when she discovers the life she meticulously built is a beautiful, gilded lie? When she finds out the man she trusts her partner in creating an empire has used their fortune to build a sanctuary for his mistress, most would confront, cry, and crumble. But Amelia Sterling is not most women. For her heartbreak wasn't an ending, it was a catalyst. She didn't just get mad, she got even on a scale so audacious, so silent and absolute, it would redefine the very meaning of revenge. This is the story of how a wife pushed to the edge didn't just slam a door, she bought the entire island it was built on. The Sterling household ran on a kind of silent, gilded autopilot. Located in the most exclusive enclave of Greenwich, Connecticut, the sprawling limestone estate was less a home and more a monument to dynastic success. Every polished marble surface, every curated piece of art, and every manicured blade of grass in the 5-acre garden whispered the same word: power. And at the center of this opulent universe was Amelia Sterling, the beautiful, impeccably dressed wife of the financial titan Richard Sterling. To the outside world, Amelia was the perfect accessory to her husband's life. She hosted flawless charity galas that raised millions, knew the names of the children of every one of Richard's business partners, and maintained a figure that defied her 46 years and 2 Ivy League-bound sons. She was poised, elegant, and seemingly content to be the quiet force managing the domestic empire while Richard conquered the world of international finance. But beneath the Chanel suits and the serene smiles was a mind as sharp as any on Wall Street. Before she was Mrs. Sterling, she was Amelia Hayes, a top graduate from Wharton, with a burgeoning career in forensic accounting. She had a gift for seeing patterns others missed, for finding the single dissonant thread in a complex financial tapestry. She'd given it up, of course. Richard, with his booming laugh and irresistible ambition, had convinced her that their partnership was the ultimate merger. He would build the fortune. She would build the life. For 22 years, she had held up her end of the bargain with masterful precision. The first thread came loose on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The air was crisp, and the autumn leaves were the color of fire, a stark contrast to the cool, sterile white of Amelia's home office. She wasn't snooping. She never snooped. It was a matter of principle, but she was meticulous. Once a quarter, she reconciled their personal and family trust accounts, a habit from her old life that gave her a quiet sense of order. It was a wire transfer from one of their auxiliary accounts, a slush fund for miscellaneous investments, as Richard called it. A sum of $8 million. Not enormous by their standards, certainly not enough to raise a corporate flag, but significant enough for a personal account. The recipient was a shell corporation she'd never heard of, Isla de las Palmas Holdings, LLC. The memo line was clinically vague: real estate acquisition, parcel 7. Curiosity, cold and sharp, pricked at her. Richard was a man of grand gestures, but he was also a man who loved to boast. A new property, especially one with a name as evocative as Isla de las Palmas, the island of palms, was something he would have mentioned. He would have shown her architectural renderings over a glass of vintage Bordeaux, speaking of legacy and their golden years. But there had been nothing, only silence. With the quiet efficiency that defined her, Amelia began to dig. Her old skills, dormant, but not dead, surfaced with an ease that surprised even her. The LLC was registered in Delaware, a black hole of corporate anonymity, a dead end. But the money had to go somewhere. The name Isla de las Palmas was her only clue. A quick search revealed it was a small private island in the Caribbean, a jewel of white sand and turquoise water that was being developed as an ultra-exclusive playground for the world's wealthiest. It was being marketed as the new St. Bart's, but with more privacy. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Using a premium property database she still had access to, she cross-referenced recent sales on the island. And there it was, Parcel 7, a stunning, modernist villa, perched on a cliffside complete with an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the Caribbean Sea. The sale had closed 3 weeks ago. The buyer of Record Isla de las Palmas Holdings, LLC. Amelia's blood ran cold. This was no mere investment. This was a home, a secret one. She needed more. She needed a name. The shell company was a shield, but every shield is held by someone. For this, she needed a different kind of tool. Not a database, but a human one. She called Mr. Abernathy, the family's elderly semi-retired lawyer. He had known her since she was a girl and was one of the few people in her life who remembered the sharp-witted Amelia Hayes, not just the serene Mrs. Sterling. "Arthur, it's Amelia," she said, her voice perfectly even. "I have a rather delicate query. It's a matter of due diligence on a personal investment." She gave him the LLC's name. Arthur Abernathy, a man who understood the importance of discretion, asked no questions. He simply said, "Leave it with me, my dear." The callback came 2 hours later. 2 hours in which Amelia sat perfectly still at her desk, the view of her perfect garden, mocking her with its placid beauty. The world outside her window hadn't changed, but her own personal landscape had fractured. Amelia Arthur's voice was gentle, laced with a regret that told her everything before he said a word. "The LLC is Standard Delaware Smoke and Mirrors. But the signatory on the incorporation documents, the managing member, is not Richard." Amelia held her breath. "The name is Catalina Vargas." The name struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. Catalina Vargas, a name that dripped with an exoticism that she, with her sensible Anglo-Saxon heritage, could never possess. She knew of her, of course. Miss Vargas was a rising star in the art world, a gallery curator whose sultry photos were becoming a regular feature on society pages. She was 28, with fiery dark eyes and a figure that was celebrated in the very circles Amelia politely presided over. Richard had been named a benefactor of her latest gallery project 6 months ago. Amelia had even attended the opening, shaking the woman's hand, noting the way Catalina's eyes had lingered on Richard for just a second too long. At the time, she'd dismissed it as the ambition of a young woman charming a wealthy patron. Now she saw it for what it was. The $4.8 million wasn't an investment. It was a gift, a gilded cage for a mistress. The confirmation settled not with a storm of tears or a wave of rage, but with a terrifying, absolute calm. The betrayal was so immense, so audacious, that it transcended ordinary emotion. Richard hadn't just cheated. He had used the fruits of their life together, the wealth she had helped him build and protect, to set up a parallel existence. He had taken a piece of their foundation and used it to build a monument to his deceit. She looked around her perfect office, at the photos of her sons, at the view of the life she had so carefully managed. It all felt like a stage set, a beautiful, elaborate lie, and in that moment, the years of suppressed ambition, of playing the supportive wife, of letting her own formidable intellect lie fallow, curdled into a new, cold purpose. He had bought his lover a villa. It was a grand gesture, meant to impress a young woman. She would have to make a grander one. He thought she was just the curator of his home. He had forgotten she was a forensic accountant. He had forgotten that she could see the patterns, the flaws, the rot beneath the gilded surface. And he had forgotten that she knew better than anyone how to leverage an asset. She pulled up the schematics of Isla de las Palmas again. Parcel 7 was beautiful, yes, a jewel. But it was just one parcel on an island of many. Her eyes scanned the undeveloped plots, the commercial zones, the marina rights. A plan, cold, brilliant, and utterly devastating, began to form in her mind. Richard had bought a cage. She was about to buy the entire zoo. The days following the discovery were a masterclass in deception. Amelia moved through her life with a chilling, unaltered grace. She attended a luncheon for the New York City Ballet, discussed her youngest son's college applications with a guidance counselor, and sat across from Richard at the dinner table, listening to him recount the mundanities of his day. On the surface, nothing had changed. She was still the perfect wife, her smile never faltering, her questions about his day pitched with the perfect note of gentle interest. But inside, a silent, furious engine had roared to life. Every polite nod, every loving glance she feigned was fuel. While Richard saw his serene, predictable Amelia, he was actually looking at a stranger, a cold, calculating strategist planning a war he didn't even know had been declared. Her first move was to secure her own position. For 2 decades, her finances had been interwoven with Richard's, a tapestry of joint trusts and shared accounts. It was time to discreetly pick those threads apart. She contacted Arthur Abernathy again, not by phone, but through a secure encrypted messaging app she set up for the purpose. Arthur, she typed her fingers, moving with precision. I need a complete, off-the-books audit of every asset held by the Sterling Family Trust, Richard's personal holdings, and any affiliated entities. I need to know where every dollar is, and I need you to establish a new, entirely independent holding company under my name only. Utmost discretion is required. No one, especially not Richard's people, can know. Abernathy, a man who had seen the private wreckage of a dozen high-profile marriages, understood immediately. His reply was simple. I've been waiting for this call for 10 years, Amelia. Consider it done. While Abernathy's team began the delicate work of financial archaeology, Amelia focused on her target, Isla de las Palmas. She turned her home office, once a place of domestic management, into a war room. The walls were soon covered with satellite images of the island zoning maps and ownership records for every single parcel. She worked at night after Richard was asleep, and in the quiet hours of the day when the house was empty. She drank black coffee, the caffeine sharpening her already laser-focused mind, and slept only a few hours each night. The exhaustion was replaced by a strange, exhilarating energy. She hadn't felt this alive in years. Isla de las Palmas, she discovered, was a complex patchwork of ownership. The main developer, a consortium based in Monaco, owned the central infrastructure and several prime plots slated for a hotel and golf course. The remaining beachfront parcels were owned by a variety of international billionaires, tech moguls, and old-money families. Parcel 7, Catalina's villa, was beautiful but strategically insignificant, tucked away on the western cliff. Her plan was not simply to buy a bigger house next door. That was petty, the move of a woman seeking validation. Amelia's goal was annihilation. She wasn't going to enter the game. She was going to buy the entire board. Her strategy was threefold. First, she targeted the smaller individual landowners. Through a series of newly created shell corporations with innocuous names like Azure Horizon Properties and Caribbean Legacy Ventures, all registered in different jurisdictions, to avoid creating a pattern, she began making offers. Her instructions to Abernathy's team of negotiators were clear. The offers were to be significantly above market value, all cash, with a quick, no-fuss closing. She wanted to create a sense of inevitability, a gold rush that no one would want to miss out on. The first few owners, a Russian oligarch and a Silicon Valley dropout, sold immediately. The scent of easy money was intoxicating. Soon, a quiet frenzy began among the island's landowners. Rumors flew of an anonymous, deep-pocketed buyer scooping up property. No one connected the dots. The purchases were staggered, originating from different legal firms in Zurich, London, and Hong Kong. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. Second, she went after the linchpin, the Monaco-based development consortium, Les Sables Group. They were the key. They owned the marina, the airstrip rights, and the undeveloped heart of the island. Buying them out was a far more complex challenge. They weren't interested in just cash, they were interested in legacy. Here, Amelia used Richard's own ego against him. She knew he was in the early stages of planning a massive new luxury resort division for his company, Sterling Capital. He had spoken about it with her, seeing her as a sounding board, but never a contributor. He'd even mentioned wanting a flagship property in the Caribbean. Amelia, through a Swiss intermediary, approached Les Sables Group, not with a simple offer, but with a vision. She presented a meticulously detailed 100-page prospectus for a development that would dwarf Richard's ambitions. It wasn't a gaudy resort, but a hyper-exclusive, eco-conscious sanctuary. It spoke of sustainability, privacy, and architectural harmony with the island. It was everything the sophisticated, image-conscious European investors wanted to hear. The proposal was backed by financials that were, thanks to Abernathy's audit, unimpeachable. She wasn't just offering to buy them out. She was offering them a more elegant, more profitable, and more prestigious exit than they could have imagined. They were intrigued. The negotiations began in secret. The third and most personal part of her strategy was the information war. She hired a discreet private investigator, a woman named Ms. Thorne, who was recommended by Abernathy for being a ghost with a camera. Her instructions were simple. I want to know everything about Catalina Vargas's life in that villa, her routine, her guests, her spending. And I want to know every time my husband is there. I want dates, times, and photographs, high resolution. Soon, a steady stream of encrypted files flowed into Amelia's inbox. Photos of Richard and Catalina laughing on the terrace, his hand possessively on her back. Photos of them on a yacht, the sun glinting off the water. Receipts from luxury boutiques in nearby St. Bart's, all paid for by a credit card linked to another of Richard's private accounts. Each photo, each receipt was a stab of pain, but she didn't flinch. She catalogued them, filed them, treated them as data points. This was not about emotion. This was about ammunition. One evening, Richard came home in a particularly good mood. He'd brought her a diamond bracelet, a just-because gift. As he fastened it around her wrist, his fingers cool against her skin, he smiled. "Things are going incredibly well at work, Ames," he said, using his old pet name for her. "I'm on the verge of closing the biggest deal of my career. A legacy project. I can't tell you the details yet, but it's going to be spectacular. It's going to put us on a whole new level." Amelia looked at the diamonds glittering under the light. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what he was talking about. He had likely made his own play for a piece of Isla de las Palmas. He was planning his flagship resort. He was probably negotiating with Les Sables Group himself, completely unaware that a far more sophisticated, better-funded phantom competitor was about to snatch it from his grasp. "That's wonderful, darling," she said, her voice a perfect symphony of wifely devotion. She held up her wrist, admiring the bracelet. "It's beautiful. She felt the cold weight of the diamonds against her skin and the even colder weight of the secrets in her heart. He was giving her trinkets bought with his pocket money while she was using the family fortune to quietly buy the ground from under his feet. He saw her as a beautiful passive creature to be adorned. He had no idea he was living with an architect of silent, seismic destruction. The war was proceeding on all fronts, and the enemy was not only oblivious, he was actively helping her win. Catalina Vargas believed she was living a fairy tale. At 28, she had ascended from the hustle of the New York art scene to a life of unimaginable luxury. Her new home, which she privately called El Nido, the Nest, was a masterpiece of glass and white stone, a sanctuary where the only sounds were the rhythmic crash of waves and the whisper of the sea breeze through the palm trees. She would wake up each morning in a vast bed, with linens that felt like cool silk, the sunrise painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. She'd drink coffee from a cup that cost more than her first month's rent in Brooklyn, and watch yachts slice through the turquoise water below. It was a life curated from the pages of a magazine, and at the center of it was Richard Sterling. Richard was everything she had ever wanted. He was powerful, intelligent, and utterly captivated by her. He treated her not like a secret, but like a treasure. He didn't just buy her the villa, he had it decorated by a top-tier designer flown in her favorite chef for a week to create a personalized menu and stocked the cellar with wines she'd only read about. He made her feel seen, worshipped, in a way the starving artists and pretentious critics of her old life never had. "This is our place, Kat," he'd told her, his arm wrapped around her as they stood on the terrace for the first time. "A world away from all the noise. Just for us." She believed him. She had to. The alternative was too painful to consider. She knew about Amelia, of course. It was impossible not to. The woman was a legend in their circles, the epitome of class and old money grace. Catalina had a Google alert set for her name and would study the photos from charity galas and society events. She saw the perfect hair, the designer gowns, the serene smile. She told herself that smile was a mask, that the marriage was a business arrangement, a relic of a bygone era. Richard had assured her as much. "It's complicated, Kat," he'd say, his voice low and serious. "There are trusts, the boys. You can't just dismantle a 20-year partnership overnight, but it's a shell. The love is gone. It has been for years. You are my future." She clung to those words. She replayed them in her mind as she wandered the silent, cavernous rooms of the villa. But sometimes a sliver of doubt would creep in. Her life on the island, for all its splendor, was a lonely one. Richard could only visit once, maybe twice a month, for a few days at a time. His arrivals were sudden, his departures meticulously planned. He was a whirlwind of passion and excitement. And then he was gone, and the silence would rush back in, louder than before. In the long stretches between his visits, Catalina fought off a creeping sense of isolation. She was a queen in a gilded cage. The staff were discreet and professional, but they weren't friends. She had no real connection to the island. She tried to busy herself. She swam in the infinity pool, practiced yoga on the sun-drenched deck, and worked on proposals for a new art foundation she hoped Richard would fund. But it all felt like a performance for an audience of one, and he was rarely there to see it. One afternoon, a local real estate agent, a chatty French expat named Jean-Luc, stopped by on his golf cart. He'd handled the final paperwork for the villa and had a habit of making friendly check-ins with the island's new residents. "Bonjour, Mademoiselle Varga," he called out, his voice cheerful. "Enjoying paradise?" I see it's perfect, Jean-Luc, she said, forcing a bright smile. Perfect, and about to get very exclusive, he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. There is a big mystery, buyer. Someone is buying up everything. The Davidsons, the Chen family, even the old Russian Popov. All sold. The prices are incroyable. Everyone says they are preparing the way for a single owner to take the whole island private. Can you imagine a cold knot formed in Catalina's stomach? A single owner, who Jean-Luc shrugged his eyes, twinkling. No one knows it is a ghost, a phantom with a very, very big checkbook. But whoever it is, they will be your neighbor, your only neighbor, perhaps. The news unsettled her. The island's appeal was its collection of separate private kingdoms. The idea of one person controlling everything, of a single unseen landlord, felt ominous. It made her own beautiful villa feel less like a fortress and more like a tenant's cottage. She mentioned it to Richard on his next visit. He was in an expansive mood, celebrating a breakthrough in a deal he was working on. He poured them both glasses of champagne on the terrace as the sun set. A mystery buyer, he laughed, dismissing her concerns. Don't worry about it, Kat. It's probably just some tech billionaire with more money than sense. It doesn't affect us. This little corner of the world is ours. He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. Besides, I have my own plans for this place. Big plans. My company is looking to acquire the development rights for the whole island, the Les Sables Group. We're going to build the most magnificent resort in the world here. And you, he said, tapping her nose, will be the curator of its art collection. My secret weapon. His words were a warm balm on her anxieties. Of course, Richard was the shark, not the minnow. He wasn't just a resident here, he was a future king. The mystery buyer was irrelevant. Richard would be the one in charge. Her position was secure. Her fairy tale was real. Reassured, she relaxed into his embrace, the champagne fizzing on her tongue. She felt a surge of pity for the woman in Connecticut. That poor, clueless wife, rattling around in her cold mansion, her husband's love, long since turned to ash. Amelia Sterling had the name, the history, the sons. But she, Catalina Vargas, had the passion. She had the future. She had the man himself here in her arms, planning a new world with her at its center. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, 600 miles away, Amelia Sterling was sitting in her own silent war room, looking at a high-resolution photograph of that exact embrace. She wasn't looking at it as a wife. She was looking at it as a general studying enemy positions. She noted the timestamp on the photo. She cross-referenced it with Richard's official schedule, which had him listed in a board retreat in Boston. She saved the image to a secure folder labeled Evidence Phase 2. Catalina believed she had won the man. Amelia was busy ensuring she would win the world. And the beautiful sun-drenched villa that Catalina thought was her nest was in Amelia's calculated ledger, merely a liability to be liquidated. November was a month of relentless invisible activity. While New England succumbed to the grey chill of late autumn, Amelia's secret war was heating up, fought in the silent digital world of encrypted emails and international wire transfers. She moved through her days like a phantom, her outward life a perfect decoy for the financial blitzkrieg she was orchestrating. The individual parcels on Isla de las Palmas fell like dominoes. Her outrageously generous all-cash offers were impossible to refuse. The mystery of the phantom buyer became the primary topic of gossip in the exclusive circles that Richard frequented. Amelia would listen to him and his friends speculate over dinner, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. Some say It's a Saudi prince, one of Richard's partners, mused, swirling his brandy. Others say it's a newly minted Chinese tech mogul. Whoever it is, they're paying a 30% premium. It's insane. Richard scoffed. It's amateurish. Burning cash like that, there's no strategy. I'm playing a longer, smarter game. I'm not buying the houses. I'm trying to buy the company that owns the whole chessboard. Amelia felt a thrill of cold, sharp pleasure. He was so confident, so dismissive. He was playing checkers while she was playing three-dimensional chess. He saw the purchase of individual lots as foolish, not realizing it was a deliberate tactic to create panic and isolate his own target, the Les Sable Group. The negotiations with the Monaco consortium were at a critical stage. They were impressed by her vision for the island, the Sanctuary Project, as her proposal had named it. It was a masterwork of greenwashing and sophisticated marketing, promising a blend of ecological preservation and unmatched luxury. But they were hesitant. They had also been in talks with Richard's firm, Sterling Capital. Mr. Sterling's offer is formidable. The Swiss intermediary, a dry, precise man named Mr. Fournier, told Amelia via a secure video link. Her camera was off, her presence just a disembodied voice. He is a known quantity, a powerful name in American finance. His name is powerful, but his vision is crass. Amelia countered, her voice calm and authoritative. He wants to build a monument to himself, a mega resort with a casino and 1,000 rooms. It will be a scar on the landscape. My vision preserves the island's soul. It will create a legacy, not just a profit center. You are businessmen, but you are also Europeans. You understand the value of aesthetics and heritage. Do you want the Sterling name or the Sanctuary name attached to your legacy to bolster her position? She executed her next move. Abernathy had discovered that one of the key board members of Les Sables, a French industrialist with a passion for sailing, was in deep financial trouble due to a bad investment in shipping futures. Through another shell company, Amelia bought his debt from the bank. She now owned him. A week later, Mr. Fournier arranged another call. The French board member, her silent pawn, had argued passionately in favor of the Sanctuary Project, swinging the vote. Les Sables Group had agreed in principle to sell. The price was staggering $350 million for their entire island portfolio, the undeveloped land, the marina, the airstrip, and the commercial zoning rights. Now came the hardest part, liquidating the assets to fund the purchase without Richard noticing. This was where Abernathy's forensic audit became the holy scripture of her war. For years, Richard had been moving money into a complex web of offshore trusts and investment vehicles, many of them in Amelia's name, designed to minimize their tax burden. He had explained it to her as smart estate planning. She now understood it as a vulnerability. He had given her control of a vast arsenal without realizing she would one day be willing to fire it. Working with Abernathy and a team of discreet international bankers, she began to carefully untangle the web. She sold off a portfolio of municipal bonds, here a stake in a German tech firm there. She leveraged a commercial property in London and cashed out an art fund in Geneva. Each transaction was kept just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic alert to Richard's primary financial advisors. It was a terrifying, high-wire act. If he were to run a deep audit for any reason, the whole plan would collapse. But Richard was distracted. He was consumed by his own negotiations with Les Sables Group, growing increasingly frustrated by their sudden coolness. "They're playing hardball," he grumbled to Amelia one night, loosening his tie. One minute they're ready to sign, the next they're talking about competing visions. It's infuriating. I might have to fly to Monaco and charm them myself. I'm sure you'll win them over, darling, Amelia said, handing him a glass of scotch. You always do. The final piece of the puzzle was the most audacious. The Sterling Family Trust held a massive, diversified stock portfolio that served as the bedrock of their fortune. It required both their signatures to liquidate any major part of it. This was the one firewall she couldn't bypass. So she resorted to forgery. It wasn't a simple scrawl on a piece of paper. She had years of Richard's signatures on documents, cards, and letters. Using a high-resolution scanner and her own steady hand, she practiced for days, digitally overlaying her attempts on the originals until the match was perfect. She studied the pressure of the pen, the slight upward tilt at the end of his D. It was the most nerve-wracking thing she had ever done. This wasn't just business. This was a criminal act. But the chill of her resolve had long ago frozen out any fear. She submitted the digitally signed documents to their private bank in Zurich, authorizing the sale of a $100 million block of stock with the funds to be transferred to her new holding company. She held her breath for 48 hours, waiting for a call, for an alarm, for the world to end. Nothing happened. The transfer went through. The money was hers. The final payment for the Les Sables acquisition was now secure. The deal was scheduled to close on December 5th. In a single silent transaction, ownership of nearly 90% of Isla de las Palmas, including the very land Richard hoped to build his legacy on, would pass to her. A week before the closing, Ms. Thorne, the private investigator, sent her final report. It was a video file. The quality was grainy shot, with a long-range lens, from a boat bobbing in the sea. It showed the terrace of Catalina's villa at night. The two of them were dancing slow and close, illuminated by the soft light from inside. Richard's head was bent, his lips against Catalina's hair. They looked like any other couple in love, lost in their own private world. Amelia watched the video, once her face impassive. She felt a distant, vestigial pang of what might have once been pain. But it was quickly replaced by the cold, clear certainty of her purpose. That private world was a fiction, a temporary bubble floating on the surface of a sea that she now owned. The music they were dancing to was a song only they could hear, but the ground they were dancing on belonged to her. She closed the laptop. The silent coup was complete. All that remained was the declaration of victory, and she knew exactly when and how she would deliver it. Richard Sterling was on top of the world. It was December 12th, and he was hosting the most important dinner of his career in a private room at Jean-Georges in Manhattan. The air was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. Around the long, elegantly set table were the key investors and board members of Sterling Capital. He had finally, after weeks of frustrating delays, received word from the Les Sables Group. They had rejected his offer, but had invited Sterling Capital to be a minority partner in a new, even grander development, the Sanctuary Project. He hadn't gotten the full ownership he craved, but this was the next best thing. The project was brilliant, even better than his own concept, and being attached to it would still be a monumental legacy. Tonight was about spinning this into a victory, celebrating the future of Sterling Capital's new hospitality division. He stood at the head of the table, a glass of champagne held high. He was in his element, charming, powerful, a master of the universe. To the future, he toasted, his voice booming with confidence. To a new chapter for Sterling Capital. To our new flagship project in the Caribbean, a partnership that will redefine luxury. To the sanctuary, a chorus of "To the sanctuary" echoed around the room as glasses clinked. He caught Amelia's eye at the far end of the table. She looked breathtaking tonight in a simple, dark blue gown that set off the famous sterling diamonds at her throat. She smiled at him, a serene, enigmatic smile that he mistook for pride. He felt a surge of affection for her. She was the perfect partner, the unshakable foundation upon which he had built his empire. He had no idea that foundation was about to trigger a seismic event. After the main course was cleared, Richard launched into his presentation. A large screen descended from the ceiling, and he began clicking through slides of architectural renderings, the same ones Amelia had created for her proposal. "As you can see, gentlemen," Richard said, gesturing to an image of a sleek, low-profile spa integrated into the cliffside, "this isn't just a resort, it's a statement. The lead partner in this venture is a highly private, forward-thinking investment group. They've successfully consolidated the majority of the island, and they've chosen us, Sterling Capital, to help bring this vision to life." He paused for dramatic effect. It took some doing. They were tough negotiators, but they recognized that our name, our brand of excellence, was essential to making this a global success. It was at that moment that Amelia chose to speak. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the self-congratulatory atmosphere like a shard of ice. "Richard, darling," she began, a small, apologetic smile on her face. "I hate to interrupt, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed on a few key points." A confused silence fell over the room. Richard gave a tight, forced laugh. "Amelia, sweetheart, this is a bit complex. Perhaps we can talk about it later. I think it's best we clear it up now," she said, her voice remaining perfectly pleasant. She placed her napkin on the table and rose gracefully from her chair. "You see, gentlemen, my husband is right that the lead partner in the Sanctuary project is a highly private group. He's also right that they were very tough negotiators, but he seems to be under the impression that Sterling Capital is a partner in the venture. That is regrettably not the case." She walked slowly to the front of the room, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She looked not at Richard, but at the assembled board members, her expression one of polite correction, as if clarifying a minor point in a meeting. "The controlling entity for the Sanctuary project," she continued, her voice gaining a cold, hard edge, "is a holding company called AH Holdings." She paused. "The initials stand for Amelia Hayes, my name, the one I was born with." The shock in the room was a palpable physical thing. Jaws literally dropped. Richard's face, which had been flushed with triumph, turned a pasty, sickly white. He looked at her as if he'd never seen her before. What are you talking about, Amelia?" he stammered, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw, naked confusion. "I'm talking about due diligence, Richard. A concept you seem to have forgotten," she said, her gaze finally locking onto his. The smile was gone, her eyes like chips of blue ice. "While you were occupied with other projects, I took the liberty of making a few investments of my own. I acquired the holdings of the Les Sables Group. I also acquired parcel by parcel every other private lot on Isla de las Palmas. I own the marina. I own the airstrip. I own the development rights. I own the very land you are showing in these pretty pictures. The Sanctuary project is not your partnership. It is my project, entirely." The silence was deafening. The board members stared frozen, from Amelia to Richard and back again, as if watching a cobra corner a mongoose. As for Sterling Capital's involvement, Amelia went on, her tone turning dismissive, we did consider a minority stake offer. However, after reviewing the company's current debt load and questionable recent expenditures, we've decided to move in a different direction. There will be no partnership. She had gutted him. In front of his entire board, she had not only exposed him as a fool, but had also declared his company too unstable to do business with. It was a complete and total humiliation. But she wasn't finished. She took a small step closer to him, her voice dropping so only he and those nearest could hear. "And one final piece of housekeeping, Richard," she said, the words dripping with venom. "There's a small villa on the western cliff. Parcel 7. I believe it's held by an LLC called Isla de las Palmas Holdings. The principal of that LLC is a Miss Catalina Vargas." Richard flinched, as if he'd been physically struck. As the new owner of the island's governing association, Amelia said, her voice a merciless whisper, "I'm afraid the property is in violation of several zoning codes I've just had ratified. Unapproved modifications, environmental impact issues. It's all very tedious. The eviction notice will be served tomorrow morning. I'm giving her 48 hours to vacate. You might want to let her know." She turned back to the stunned investors. "My apologies for the interruption, gentlemen," she said, her poise flawlessly restored. "Thank you for your time. I will be in touch with some of you next week to discuss potential individual investment opportunities in a project that is actually solvent." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of her husband's career, his reputation, and his secret life. Richard Sterling stood motionless by the presentation screen, his face a mask of utter devastation. He hadn't just lost a deal. He had lost his empire, his wife, and his mistress, in the space of 5 catastrophic minutes, all orchestrated by the one person he had never ever seen as a threat. The silent partner had just staged the ultimate hostile takeover. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The story of the Jean-Georges dinner became the stuff of Wall Street legend, whispered about with a mixture of awe and terror. Richard Sterling, the Titan, had not just been defeated. He had been publicly dissected with surgical precision by his quiet, elegant wife. His board, facing the humiliation and the stark reality of the company's compromised position, moved swiftly. He was out within a week, his golden parachute shredded by clauses Amelia's lawyers had advised her to insert into their corporate agreements years ago, clauses he had dismissed at the time as wifely fussing. His attempts to fight back were pathetic. He hired a team of famously aggressive lawyers who swaggered into their first meeting with Arthur Abernathy. The old lawyer simply slid a single file across the polished mahogany table. It contained a curated selection of Ms. Thorne's evidence, crystal-clear photos of Richard and Catalina, copies of credit card statements for gifts and trips, and the flight manifests proving his alibis were lies. The final page was a forensic analysis of the $4.8 million transfer. Abernathy said nothing. He didn't have to. Richard's lawyers, recognizing a checkmate when they saw one, called their client and told him to surrender unconditionally. The war was over before the first shot was fired. He was trapped, defeated, and utterly alone. For Catalina, the end of the fairy tale was brutal and swift. The eviction notice was delivered by a stoic island official. It was cold, legal, and absolute. Her frantic calls to Richard first went to voicemail, then were answered with panicked, empty promises, and finally with a torrent of rage as he tried to blame her for his downfall. She hung up the receiver, trembling in her hand, the illusion of their special place shattering into a million pieces. She was not a treasured queen. She was collateral damage. She packed 2 suitcases with the designer clothes he had bought her, leaving the rest behind. As the last ferry carried her away from the island, she looked back at the glass villa, El Nido, now looking less like a nest and more like a mausoleum. Its beauty was a lie, a monument to her own naivety. She was a casualty of a war she never knew she was fighting in. Amelia never spoke to Richard again. She filed for divorce, her terms non-negotiable. She didn't want the house in Greenwich or the apartment in New York. She didn't want his art or his cars. He could keep the trappings of their old life. She was building a new one. She took the Sterling Family Trust's controlling interest in her new holding company, AH Holdings, and left him with the hollowed-out shell of Sterling Capital and an income that would allow him to live comfortably, but never again powerfully. She had taken his legacy and left him with a life sentence of mediocrity. 6 months later, Amelia stood on the highest point of Isla de las Palmas, a place she now called Serenity Point. The sea breeze whipped strands of her hair across her face, but she welcomed the sensation. The air here was the air of her own kingdom. The island was humming with the purposeful energy of creation. Her vision, the Sanctuary Project, was taking shape. Ethically sourced timber and local stone were being used to construct a series of low-impact private residences and a world-class wellness center. She walked the construction sites daily, wearing boots and a hard hat, her old Chanel suits replaced by practical linen trousers. She knew the names of the foremen and the architects. She debated the merits of geothermal heating with the engineers and reviewed reef restoration data with the marine biologists she'd hired. This was not a vanity project. It was a business, an ecosystem, a world she was building from the ground up with intelligence and foresight. Her son Michael, 21, and with his mother's sharp eyes, stood beside her looking at architectural plans on a tablet. He had taken a year off from Harvard to be her right hand. "The solar grid schematics are in," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "We'll be 100% energy independent by phase 2. "It's brilliant, Mom." Amelia smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "It's just good business, Michael. Your father always thought in terms of conquest of takeovers. The key is to think in terms of creation. You build something that lasts, something that respects its environment, and the value follows." Later that day, she took a golf cart to the Western Cliff to Parcel 7. The villa stood empty, a ghost of a former life. She walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. She ran a hand along the countertop, where Richard and Catalina had drunk champagne. There was no anger, no triumph. There was only a quiet sense of closure. This place was the catalyst, the symptom of the disease that had infected her life. It had to be excised. She walked out onto the terrace and looked at the perfect infinity pool. "Tear it down," she said quietly to Michael, who had followed her. "I want this cliff restored to its natural state. We'll plant native sea grape and gumbo limbo trees. This will be a preserve. The view is for everyone." She looked out at the turquoise water, at the white crescent of sand that was her beach on her island. She thought of the woman she had been just a year ago, the perfect, serene wife in her gilded cage. The betrayal had been a bizarre and painful gift. It had shattered the cage and forced her to remember that she had wings. Richard had tried to buy a woman's affection with a villa. It was a failure of imagination. Amelia had answered by buying a world, not for revenge, but for her own rebirth. She was no longer Mrs. Sterling. the wife of a titan. She was Amelia Hayes, the founder of the sanctuary, an empress of her own making, standing on the soil of her new reign. And this was only the beginning. Amelia Sterling's story is a powerful modern-day epic of betrayal and spectacular triumph. It's a testament to the fact that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous when pushed too far. She didn't just reclaim her dignity, she rebuilt an empire in her own image, turning the weapons of deceit and infidelity into the building blocks of her new legacy. Her story serves as a chilling reminder: never ever underestimate the woman who has access to the accounts. What did you think of Amelia's ultimate revenge? Was it a masterstroke of genius or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of incredible real-life drama and empowerment, please hit that like button, share this video with friends who love a tale of epic justice, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Thank you for watching.